Ahoy! We know that New World will have a big announcement or multiple big announcements in May when it comes to new things coming in the rest of the year, and we actually have a lot of information from the past that could tell us more about what exactly this could be, and that's what I want to share with you today. One of my company mates asked me what I think it'll be, so might as well give you that information too. This is of course speculation, but I will back that with quite a few things. So the first thing that's almost impossible to not happen is the announcement of some new PvP content. This is by far the most requested thing on every single video, and they are aware of the complaints. They've mentioned them multiple times in their own videos. So they're definitely working on something here unless they hate money. That said, content in New World's realms can mean many things. For example, to them, cross-world is content, or a group finder is content. I would argue none of those things are content, but as such, even a mode getting cross-world, like cross-world arenas, which was originally announced, would be content. I don't believe that is the full extent of what we'll be seeing, because we've already had hints that they are working on something for PvP, for cross-world, that may potentially be a role selection or a role filter for PvP, for arenas, or something like a matchmaking system of some level, so I think there's more to this. However, this system doesn't necessarily have to be for Arena, or Arena could be an early testing ground, because when they announced the group finder system for the dungeons, the new one, they actually asked as one of the questions under the video what mode we would like to see next in terms of cross-world. So it is possible that these systems they've been working on, which have been data mined as well, by the way, so there have been mentions of matchmaking to some degree, may actually be for something entirely different. And that is where one thing comes in that they have already announced last year as something they want to do in the future, and that's casual wars. So wars where no territory is at stake, and it's not necessarily between companies, but rather it's just anyone can join in, and then the group gets split into two and you fight a war against each other. Since this was announced last year, and I was kind of thinking maybe they would have done it last year, I have a strong feeling that this might be what they are planning to do as the big PvP content this year, because again, they know there's a lot of demand for it, and it would make a lot of sense in terms of having the cross-world for it, having some sort of group filtering system, so you have a balanced war composition and all that other stuff that goes into it, so there would be some logic behind it. In that context, I think it's worth looking at another thing from the past as well, because they were planning to reduce the number of players in wars from 50v50 to 40v40. This was at the time met with a lot of negative feedback, especially from war companies, which made sense because you have your set roster and you don't want to kick 10 people out, and those 10 people don't want to get kicked out, so there was a lot of backlash and they stuck with the 50v50. But I think for a casual mode, a 40v40 or even maybe smaller than that, would make a lot more sense, because it just means the queue is quicker, and all of the concerns about an already existing organized war comp don't exist, because it's just a casual mode that everyone can queue into. So to me, a slightly scaled down version would make a lot of sense and would also allow it to set itself apart a little bit more from the other wars. On the other hand, the downside would be that you don't get as much practice for a real war, because it is slightly different, but I don't think that's the biggest issue. I think many people who want to queue casual wars just want to participate in casual wars. The alternative option would of course be a completely new mode, but I don't think the devs really want to split the player base up between more modes, as much as I would love to see something like a capture the flag mode or a more PvP focused mode in general. I'm not sure if that'll be a reality, or if that is a reality, then I don't know if we'll ever see casual wars. Of course, there's also the possibility of either a new or overhauled OPR map, which I think is at least somewhat likely, but I would feel like if that was all they did for the year, it was just a new OPR map, a lot of people would not be satisfied with that, including me, so I'm not sure if that's where it's going to go. I would love to see multiple of these things become a reality, like a new OPR map and casual wars, but knowing their general pace, I am absolutely not going to expect that. If you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. If you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon. I just posted another trading tip there yesterday that is very time sensitive at the moment. The next thing I could see changes to is the monetization model. Jay Oddity had a lot of theories around this recently. He suggested that the game might be going free to play and that we might be seeing somewhat of a monthly battle pass system. And I did originally think that New World was going to go free to play eventually, and the expansions would be what cost the money. And maybe they would do a in-between model where you're not going free to play, but you're getting the game included with your Prime membership. It seemed likely to me because they'd attract a very large player base and then make more profits with the expansions that people would still have to buy and battle pass systems and whatever they have. But now I'm not so sure. Jay thinks that seasons are possibly going away because they have been removed from the website, which I think is not impossible, but I also don't think it's necessarily the case. I think they may have just removed the seasons because they were from last year or something. I'm not sure here. I don't really have a strong opinion on that. But what I will say is that I think it's very, very likely that we're getting a console release. This is something that has been hinted at a lot through the gamepad support being pushed heavily all of a sudden, and all of the other new changes also play very much into a console system. For example, being able to very easily queue into dungeons with just the push of a button takes a lot of the navigation out of that. That would be annoying on console. So I believe console is 99% certain to happen. And if console happens, then they'd be shooting themselves on the foot if they release the game free to play immediately, unless again they would charge extra maybe for the next expansion so that they make the money back, because otherwise, well, you have this entirely new player base, but they're not going to pay initially to play the game. That doesn't seem very profitable. So I would imagine that at least for quite a while after the console release, the game would not be free to play. If New World ends up not releasing on console, then that may be a different story. On the PvE side of things, we actually also have multiple things that were already announced last year. I'm sure we get some new expeditions as usual, but there are some more specific things that could be interesting. On one hand, one of the things that the devs were planning for the future was the corrupted portal overhaul. The goal for those was that instead of having them spread all over the area and being, well, kind of a nuisance to farm, they wanted it to be a more concentrated event where it's more rare for a portal to spawn, but then it's kind of a thing where everyone goes because you get very good rewards for doing it. It's more challenging, much more going on. And honestly, that sounds good and fun and something that shouldn't be all too difficult to execute, considering the whole system for portals already exists. It's more about concentrating what's in there, putting some of the mobs together, and maybe changing up some of the rewards. So I think similar to the small invasion overhaul, this is something they can relatively easily fit in with other content. And then we also know that they want to do a raid with trash mobs and multiple bosses, also something they announced last year. Scot has since been on an interview and mentioned something about Medusa, and we found some files about the Medusa raid, so that is likely what it is. If you don't know anything about that at all, also a good opportunity to subscribe here, because I will talk about that in more detail in the next days and tell you everything we actually know about this raid, which I thought was going to come out a whole lot earlier than it actually will be. Based on how the devs have talked about this, the 10-man trial will not be this raid, so yeah, I think this is something we will be seeing, similar to the Sandworm. This is probably something they will release with an expansion. That would seem the most likely to me, but I would think that that would likely be this year, because the whole theme is kind of based on the last expansion. If they push it further away than that, it would get kind of weird, I would say. We also know that they are working on an engine overhaul, essentially Azoth Engine 2.0. This is a little bit vague because we don't really know what exactly is the overhaul and how far they're into it and what's the new version, or how they look at that. I think it's more of a in-progress changes kind of thing. So we'll probably see some more about that. We were meant to already hear a lot more about the combat code. I'm assuming they ran into some issues there because there was an announcement about that being on PTR soon. One of the devs was talking about that. And now, well, we haven't really heard anything since. So again, I think the combat code is being worked on, and we'll probably hear more about more specific things that they're working on later in the year. Company housing has also been mentioned in the past, but I'm not entirely sure if we'll be seeing that this year. I think it will be very cool to see that, but I feel like it's a very big project. I think it's a lot of work going into a system like that, and probably create new assets for it too. You probably wouldn't want to use the current existing houses. So I would imagine that that's something that is probably further down the line, just based on the amount of workload going into it, even though there is a decent amount of demand within the community. What I think is more likely to happen this year, because it pretty much affects all players, it could be a potential way to monetize more, and it kind of was done in a similar way last year with Transmog, is the barber system, where you can change your character's appearance, maybe with new appearance features that we don't have yet at the moment, or very likely, because that's how New World likes to do things, and I'm sure they will charge for some of those. So that's something that I could absolutely see coming this year, because I think effort-wise that is within the realms of what is possible as well. This is by no means a comprehensive list. I'm sure there are some things that they haven't talked about at all that we might see later this year. Just what we know so far, what we have hints at, or what I generally think is most likely. More on the Medusa raid in the next days. Consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you want to hear about that. Or if you want to hear about World of Warcraft Season of Discovery 2. That's what I've been playing a little bit lately. And if you'd like to support my work further, you can do so on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that. And thank you for watching. Duke Sloth out.